Welcome to Adobe Live. I'm Flynn and I'm joined by Liv King. And what did we cover in this episode?
We looked at designing your own UI library based off an existing kind of prototype that you've got and really looking at components, exploring that. So we'll get stuck in.
Hope you enjoy. Hey everyone, and welcome to Adobe Live. I'm your host this afternoon, Flynn Tracy, and I'm here with Liv King. Hello, Liv.
Hello.
Welcome back.
Good to be here on the other side.
Yeah, absolutely.
On the side of the seat.
It's good to have you back. We've done some digital product design stuff before.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So some of you in the audience may recognize Liv. We've got her on for the whole month. We're going to do a creative challenge after the live stream today. So we've got like an hour and a half of cool digital design content. Using XD. If you're experienced in Adobe XD, then there's plenty for you to learn. And if you've never used it before and you don't even know what we're talking about, then this is a good place to start as well.
Sure is.
So hi to everyone in the chat. Say hello and tell us where you're from. And you can log into the chat using your Adobe ID. So just the information that you use to log into Creative Cloud. You can jump in there and you can ask questions as we go at any stage, and we'll do our best to answer them. To the best of our ability. But maybe for those who don't know who you are yet, maybe you can talk about sort of who you are and what you do.
Mm-hmm. Sure, cool. So I am a digital product designer. So I have a bit of background in brand actually. So that was where I started. We were talking a bit about this earlier. So that's where I've been. And then sort of getting into brand was really great. I think it actually informs a lot of product stuff I do, and I don't think you can really ever separate the two. But I sort of got to this point where I was like, you know, I think you can make something look as good as you can, and you can rebrand and you can do a lot with the brand, but there's just not enough that you can do to actually inform the real problem, which is usually with the product.
Right.
And given that that's what we do a lot with and we kind of use every day, like it just felt so important to kind of get more into that side of things. So yeah, a little while ago, sort of a few years ago, I ended up making a proper kind of big switch into product design, and that's mostly what I focus on now, although you know, the other week I was doing a mural for Spotify, so it really varies.
Yeah.
But I quite like that. I quite like that I have a bit of range of flexibility, and I'm freelancing at the moment, so bit of options, which is kind of nice. So
welcome to the freelance life.
Yeah, it's good.
the roller coaster and ups and downs of freelance life.
Yeah.
Hey JB in the chat, welcome back. Yeah, great. I think maybe it will be interesting because we go out to quite a wide audience to just explain what you mean by product design. Because I remember when some people started using the term, a couple of years ago with me, I was like, wait, product design? You're designing chairs?
Yeah.
So maybe you could explain.
Yeah, I get that all the time, and I have to explain it to mostly my family who still don't quite understand what I do. So when I say digital products, I'm talking about, I guess that could be like often they're apps on your phone. There might be native apps. They could be kind of built web apps. They could just be a website that might have like an e-commerce functionality. So it's kind of like there's a bit of a blurry kind of field around how you define it. But generally speaking, those are the sorts of things that I would work on, things that are kind of, what you would class as like a product that someone might go out and buy or subscribe to, but they're just in digital form.
It's a digital form.
So that's the kind of simplest explanation. But I think when it comes to digital product designer, I generally find, and this is what sort of the role I've been in the last little while, is you end up doing a bit of both UX and UI. I tend to lean on the visual design side of things, just because of my general background in brand and visual design. But, you might lean more heavily into UX. But generally speaking, a product designer would probably be expected to know a bit of both. And that's kind of what I wanted to look at as well today, and definitely stick around into the creative challenge because I'll get into that a little bit more. So it's not just about UI, it's definitely about thinking about people's experiences going through. And I mean, the way I explain it to my family on like a really basic level is I use an analogy of like building a house. So, you might, as a brand designer, sometimes you come in right at the end and you're like interior designing and you're kind of changing how the wall paint might look, which is fine, but you can't also change the fact that, you built something a level too high or the stairs are in the wrong place. Or
right.
That's the kind of very basic way I describe it, is that at least with product design, you're kind of having that influence and kind of like designing the experience from the big top to the bottom of what is involved from like the tech to the experience to the final output and what that actually looks like with people when they're kind of holding their hands. So yeah, that's probably how I'd describe it.
I like that. It's a good explanation. I really like it. And the explanation of product design as well, I think is very, very good too. So maybe we could sort of get stuck into what we're going to talk about today. Maybe we have a top level kind of view of what we're going to do before we get stuck in.
Awesome. Yep. So what I've got here on my screen at the moment is just a little overview of the sort of thing that I'll be looking at. But essentially what we'll be looking at today is how to create your own UI library. This is something that I think is really useful and really handy to have, and it speeds up a lot of your workflow. But I think more than anything, like there's a couple of reasons why you might think about using a UI library at some point. You might start to use the ones that are like already inbuilt into XD, and I'll go into some of those where you can download and start to use ones like iOS, UIKits or Material Design, depending on what platform you're designing for. But if you're working on your own app or your own product, there's probably a point, particularly if it starts to grow, and you've prototyped it, you've tested it, you're ready to get into sort of production, or you're working with other team members that you might think, all right, we need to keep things consistent, we need to kind of set some defining rules around how this looks, how it feels, set the patterns, set some guidelines. So that's where you might start to think, all right, this is a good time to bring in a UI library and start to define what that actually is, so that other people coming in can really use that, especially when you start to scale out. Like I'm about to show you, I've got sort of a prototype here, but once you start to have 15 different flows through an app, that's going to make your life a lot easier, and the people you're working with to kind of then roll that out quite quickly and consistently. So
cool.
Yeah, so this is what I've got here, is kind of like a bit of an overview of the prototype. If I scroll across, I've got most of this sort of set out here. I've got some functional screens. So this is a bit of a like fashion kind of app that it's a bit of a mock-up of one that I was just thinking would be nice. I've kept it quite simple and clean. I've tried to like bring a bit of quite strong style into it, so it's got a bit of its own personality, so it's not kind of standard. And I've used sort of images just off Unsplash. You could use Adobe, the image library.
Stock.
Yep. Adobe Stock for something like this as well.
What I tend to do is I tend to use something like Unsplash when I'm prototyping, doing stuff internally. And then, if I'm ready to ship something, then that's when I'll invest in Stock.
You might need some licenses for things. You might need to get it actually kind of formally approved. Whereas in this kind of instance, you're just testing some things.
Exactly, yeah.
So in this kind of instance, I've kind of got enough of this prototype to start to think about where does it go next and start to roll out some of the kind of the flows that I've got. But before we dive into that, what I thought I'd quickly show you is also some of the existing UI kits and UI libraries you can get on Adobe XD. So if I just go up here in my home, you can go into, I believe it is, let me have a look. Where did I put this? Oh, here we go. So I've got it already here. I believe, in add-ons, you've got, this is where you find most of it. So there's heaps of stuff in here. A lot of these are sort of plugins. But if I go up to this one here, which is UIKit, that's cool. I don't have the internet. I can play the little monster game. We could just do this for the rest of the live stream. Okay, I'm not going to do that.
We can fix that. I can log you in a bit.
Yep. So we'll just log in a little bit. But essentially, I can go into these UI kits. There's this one from here from iOS. Now that's going to push me off to a different link on the web, and it'll give me just access to download that UI kit. If I just go in here, I've got these saved already, so I'll see what I can find. Whoa, that was interesting.
Wow, that zoomed out.
That was cool. So I'll go into here. I've got existing UI kits just saved separately. So I'm just going to open this one. And I don't know. Oh, that's because I was doing it through Chrome, because I know how to use a laptop.
Hey, Festus. See you in the chat down there. How you doing? Welcome back.
Bear with me. Actually, here, I've got it open already. So if I open, here we go. All right, so this is the material guidelines one. So there's a bit of a difference between
So material design is the Google.
Yes, yeah.
Right?
So Android, anything Google related, that's their kind of their style guide essentially.
Right.
And when you open these, I guess, sticker sheets or the guidelines, you'll find all their assets here. And so all the assets of a UI library live in this panel here, in the assets one.
Mm-hmm.
So on the bottom left, you've kind of got these two. I've got all my kind of different components and different elements and different layers there. If I click on this button up at here, this will kind of switch me over into assets.
Mm-hmm.
And what you've got is kind of all these ones here under colors. So they've defined what these are. I've got character styles here, so I kind of already know what those are. And then I've got all these components. So symbols, I've got sort of bigger components. If you kind of go further down, or they'll be around here somewhere. But essentially all of these are really handy because basically you can just drag it in and start to build up things you've got already.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes life a lot simpler and quicker to use. And especially if you're prototyping and you don't want to think too hard about what's the style. And like I sometimes find that you might be prototyping and you don't have a brand or you don't have a style just yet, or you actually deliberately don't want to put style in because people get so hung up on colors and fonts and things like that, and it's a very subjective kind of way to look at something, when really if you're just prototyping something, maybe you just want to get a feel for how they're experiencing something. So it's not getting caught up in the details of like, do they like the pink that you used, but more like, is that actually something you would use or kind of a natural behavior for you? So
yeah, and it comes down to the functionality of the digital product kind of over the form a little bit. Personal choice and
yes, definitely. And you need to kind of like, I think it's always good to get to that point where you are refining, and that's where I'll kind of get into this in a minute. But you know, when you're like starting out and when you're kind of getting a feel for it, often it's really handy to start to use the things that are already there for you, and also things you're familiar with. Like me personally, I have an iPhone. Working within an iOS UIKit is super quick and easy for me because I kind of know where everything goes already. I use it every day and I'm used to what the patterns are, so it actually doesn't feel like I'm doing something too foreign. And if you do end up designing the app to a native platform rather than say like doing a sort of custom app, you do want to follow some of those patterns as well. Like it's not, you don't want to go too far out, and often using the UIKit can really help guide you to design in a way that's native and will make your life and also the developers' lives a lot easier.
Yeah, developers love it when you use the native kits, don't they?
They do.
Got a couple of questions from YouTube. Just a note for anyone watching on YouTube, there should be a link over where you can watch on adobeapaclive.com. And if you do that, we'll see the questions much faster. But we do have two here. Apurav Sharma said, before starting any design project, how do you ensure consistency in your design? Do you start with creating a style sheet first? Which is pretty interesting because that's kind of, we're almost doing a digital style sheet in a way.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's kind of, I think it really depends in some ways, I guess, how you're working. If you're working with developers straight up and you're going straight into like styles and actually in code, maybe you would start with a style sheet that's defined by, you know, you've worked with them to define that and you're trying to actually build a live prototype, for example. If you're doing a designed one, I think you could start with a style guide or a style sheet. That's kind of like a UI library, really. I find that sometimes you might come into a product or a team and that's already defined for you, and that's really easy. So I've worked in a couple of different companies where, you know, they're quite big companies and they already have a library and they already have stuff to work to, which is super easy. It means you can get going really fast. But I think in terms of like creating some consistency, sometimes right at the beginning, you know, you might talk to, if you're working with another designer, you might sort of say, all right, sort of what are the general look and feel are we going for? Like, and to be honest, I would actually probably work with someone who's going to be a bit different to me, and I'd want them to explore what they want to do, and then I'd explore our thing. And then at this point, I think this is like kind of replicating that point where you might come back together and say, all right, we've got this thing, we know this is working, let's start to refine it into like a UI library that from here on, everything's kind of converged into one, and we're going to take this forward and keep it all consistent.
Yeah, cool. Great.
Yeah.
Great answer. We also had a question from Amit Pal Singer. How to make special logo for any company. Is it possible in Adobe? Now, I don't know about you, but I'll probably most of the time use something like Illustrator for that. But I have actually designed a couple of logos that were only ever meant to be in the digital space in Adobe XD. But that was more just because I wanted to play around with it.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, use whatever works for you. I think something to consider as well is like the final output of the logo. So if your logo is only going to ever exist digitally, no reason why you can't do it in XD. I'm pretty sure you can export, you should be able to export vector out of that.
Yeah, you can do EPS.
Yep, you can do all of that.
Everything.
I would, if say it's a bigger brand, there's kind of the chance it'll be in print. Maybe I would do it in Illustrator just because there's a bit more variety and range for Illustrator. You can kind of, you can change the color profiles. You can kind of tweak things as you need it. But yeah, there's all range. I probably wouldn't do it in Photoshop is the only one. Although I think you can do a bit of vector stuff in there anyway. But
yeah, you can kind of do everything in Photoshop.
That's true, actually. Yes, you can. So yeah, really
but great questions, guys. So keep them coming.
Yeah. More questions, the better. Cool. So I've just looked at this, and this is our material guide kind of sticker sheet. It's got all the UIKit elements in there. And something I will point out is that there's a lot here. So you've got your typography styles, you've got full components like cards, you've got lists, you've got different grids, tooltips, you've got switches and sliders, which is great because what they're trying to do is give you the full range of everything that you might need depending on what you're designing.
Yeah.
Now, the one that we're going to do today is kind of like a UI library light. Like it's not going to be as robust as this, but what is interesting is when you start to build the library and you start to sort of find that you do have a use case for a switch or a list kind of, or like this index scroller, for example, over here. Like that's when you can start to add to the library and build it. And actually XD is pretty good at allowing you to kind of update things, and so that anyone else using that library will actually have that update happen real time with them as well. So it's all kind of in the cloud, which is really cool. So so I'm going to jump out of this and come back to my prototype here. Now there's a couple of ways you could kind of approach this. You can start with kind of just defining some of the styles early on and deciding what that's going to be. I prefer to sort of get it to a point where I think things are working, and then I'm going to work my way into creating a little style guide. So what I've put together in a separate document here is, I will need the internet for this actually.
We will.
Which is a bit of a problem.
I will do that. So Alex was talking about, maybe you can answer this while I do this. So do you want to read that one while I do this one?
So Alex says, it's a really good point. Don't want to make all the decisions up front. I'd much prefer to get to the structure and experience together first. Yeah, that's a really good point. Like I often work the same as well. Like I think coming from brand sometimes, and coming from more visual design, it's very easy to be like, oh, it's going to look this way, or I think this is going to be kind of like nice here, or this is how the components are going to fit together, and you get carried away with that. But actually, you kind of need to let the experience define that a bit better, because you might find that you've been using this icon set the whole way through, and that's great, and then it's you're loving the look and feel of it, but actually then you get to this point within the product and you realize that doesn't work at all, or like you're using this component and it doesn't scale, or I can't use this for that, or actually when I bring it, if I'm working on the web and I bring it down to mobile, it just doesn't work. So I think I try to like work quite loosely. I often do prototypes in just black and white and keep it really loose so that there's enough there that people get the feel for it, but you don't actually have to do those big decisions sort of style-wise until a bit later on.
Yep, cool. You should have internet access now. Thanks Alex for that comment. Yeah, it's a really good point.
So the reason I needed to have internet access for this is because as you can see by this little cloud icon at the top here, this document is on the cloud. And the reason it is, as opposed to separate to and just save locally, is so that I can then share it to everything else. So if I had another cloud document that was a library, I can actually click this button here that says link assets, and that will bring that in as a preformed kind of library. So, but I want to create something that people can do that with. So I want to keep this in the cloud. So what I've got here is sort of like a mini sort of style guide. I've sort of, as you can see, I've started to fill it out a little bit just because I think with the time that we've got today, I didn't want to like get too far behind and in the weeds of creating stuff. But essentially the way I've broken this down is I've got one for brand assets. I've got a sort of an artboard for brand assets. I've got one for colours. I've got sort of these master colours, and I've got a section to put some utility colours in. I've got one for icons, and I've kind of broken that into different areas as well. I've got, that's too far. Oops. I've got one for typography, and I've got buttons here, and then I've just got some bigger components, which I've already started to put in there. These sort of cover off a lot of the basics of what you might start with a UI library. And the reason I've set it up like this and not kind of like all over the place is because I want this really to be easy for people to pick up, so that if I'm not using this and someone else is very new to this and wants to pick it up, they can really quickly look at this and say, all right, this is what this kind of style guide is.
Yeah.
And it's kind of laid out in what a more traditional kind of style guide might look like as well. And that's mostly because I find them very easy to read, and I think it's good to communicate that sort of stuff and quickly get your head around all the different components and see how they thread together. So what I'm going to do is get started on actually creating some of these as components. So this is kind of the important part of creating the UI library. So I've got a few things in here which I've already imported some logos. So I've got a logo for this app which is called Lookbook. Now, it's not actually featured in the prototype at all, but what I'll show you later is why this is useful for things like when we go and maybe make the desktop version of this. So it's pretty simple. I'm going to select this. This is a vector. I'm going to click Add to Components. And as you can see, it just instantly becomes a component here.
So just before we get into there, Alex, I think we're about to show you probably why doing this in XD as opposed to Illustrator is a value, especially if you're new to XD. Really is this kind of this process of setting things up in a way to save you heaps and heaps and heaps of time later, in the same way that you could use Illustrator to do a 40-page document with lots of text, but you kind of want to use InDesign because you can set up styles to instantly change things. Similar sort of thing in that if we build the foundation at the very beginning, you can just save yourself tons and tons and tons of time.
Yep. I think like Adobe tools and programs are really versatile, but there is a point where you sort of have to pick and choose the right thing for the right medium, or the right medium for the right tool.
No, you're just keen, Alex. It's good.
Yeah,
it's great.
It's fine. But stay through to like a little bit towards the end, and you'll really see kind of why this is quite useful. So what I've got here is I've got the logo. Now I know this is a component because it's got a green it's gone from blue to green, and I've got this little diamond at the top which says this is the master component. You kind of see when I drag, so what I'll do, I'll just rename this to logo 1. And now this one, because it's the master, I'm going to use my mouse because that's a lot easier, is green. And if I drag this on here, this one's green but doesn't have the diamond at the top. So the diamond tells me that this is the master one. So anything I do to this will edit these ones, but this is kind of a derivative of the master. And it means I can do some things in this, like take away some elements that won't affect this. In the case of a logo, I don't really want to do much to that master logo, so I'm just going to keep it as it is. I'm also going to make this another component and label that logo 2, and this one. There's probably a better naming convention than these, but I'm going to go with logo 3. And then this is kind of handy because what this is going to help me with is when I want to make a little app icon. So rather than just like copy and paste this into there, or like kind of just use something completely different for this, I'm going to sort of nest this component within this one here. So what I'm going to, that didn't work. I'm just going to group that, bring that down, and I'm going to change the color to white. So I'm now going to just center this, align it. All right, so that's looking pretty good. That's just gone blue because I grouped it, which I didn't do before, which I should have. But as you can see, now I have this sort of like group, which is like the app icon. And now I'm going to make a component out of that. So it's almost like a component within a component.
Right.
But that's useful because if I go back and edit my master, anything that happens to that will happen to this one as well.
So if you change it to...
In theory,
yeah.
Yes. Let's see if this actually... Yeah. So as you can see on here, that's now gone.
Right.
And
so you get like a client in the future, or you go out testing and say, actually, people can't read this because of the tones that I used or something like that. You can just change the master and it'll affect every design from here on out.
Yeah. And that's kind of the beauty of having that consistency, and it dramatically saves you time, especially because I've been in many situations where that kind of last minute call comes through and you're like, but my entire files have this one thing that's different, and you realize like, I'm going to have to change this, and it's super quick and easy because it will then roll across everything that you've got. Cool. So what I'm going to do is like come through and just add in a few of these elements too. So the other part, I might have some different colors. So these are just there to make some different app icons if I wanted to. I'm going to just flip between basically my prototype and my library to start to fill out all of those things. So the other thing I wanted to maybe put in there are some shapes. Now on this screen here for search, I've kind of just gone a bit playful and made buttons out of these kind of brand shapes. Not particularly native, but it was more a bit, this is where I think I'm just going for like a bit of the brand rather than kind of the functionality. But it kind of adds to the look and feel. So I'm gonna see if I can probably just copy and paste these across. As you can see, they're in white, which is not super useful. So I'm just gonna group. Actually, what I might do is, these are pretty basic shapes, so I'm just gonna recreate them using these shapes at the top here. So I've sort of got a rectangle shape. I'm just gonna change the fill, and I'm gonna make that to 2. And I've got a sort of oval shape as well. And the reason I'm going to make these into, I guess, components as well is because these, I guess I would call them like brand elements or brand assets as they are in this kind of artboard. And it means that when I use them in the future, they're quite consistent. So I might use them for a button, but I also might use them as a graphic kind of object or a pattern or like something else in the future. But it means that like they're all quite consistent. So again, I just want to click that plus button. I've now got it as a component, and I'm going to just call this oval. And then I'll just...
Shape 1, shape 2, shape 3.
Yeah. I'm trying to be a bit more consistent.
If you're just joining us, we're here with Olivia King, and we are going through UI pattern libraries, and we're talking about basically everything around the digital product design space while we're at it. So feel free to log in with your Adobe ID if you do have any questions. We'll do our best to answer them as we go and at the end and all that sort of stuff.
So I'm just making another... what I'm doing here is I'm just rounding off those edges a little bit because I kind of have a mix of different shapes. And I just did that over here with this sort of rounded corners tool. And I've just set the radius of those edges to 5, which I might just make it a bit bigger. Just do 8.
I love grabbing the little circles and pulling them
that is
in
also
as well,
very fun.
Which I quite like doing.
Actually, let's just do that. There you go. So 15, a lot bigger than 8. All right. Square. Hopefully I can spell square. There we go. All right, that's good enough for now. I can definitely add to that more, and that's fine, but just for the purposes of kind of getting through a few things in here so I can demo them later, we'll just pick up speed move on to colors, which arguably I probably could have started with first because colors often go through everything else within the app. And I might actually go back and change these components, these brand items to have a different color. The good thing is actually if I just keep them as they are and I move them onto here, I can still change that to the right color and it doesn't affect the master, which is fine. So it's really up to you. Sometimes it's just easier to have to keep going and work in a kind of logical sequence. So I've got this kind of dark maroony color in here already, but what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna try and grab a couple of different elements here that have the different colors that I've got in here. So, and I'm just going to, again, this is not like necessarily the right or wrong way to do it, but this is just the quickest way that I often find. So I've just basically placed them here. Don't know where that other one went. Mystery. But let's just move this. Oh, okay, it's off the artboard. So I'm just going to basically color pick these now that I've got them. And I'll do that yellow, which actually is now faded. So I'll just bring this down here.
Yeah, it was fading it because it's off the board.
Sometimes it recognizes that it's off the board and it kind of still does it, but other times it's not.
Yeah, the color pick is quite interesting. Like you can even color pick anything from the menu or the share button on the top right and everything. It literally just takes the screen color. Yeah,
exactly. It's quite easy. This one's a tricky one because it's actually on the background of this. So I might just paste this artboard up here and I'll zoom out a bit. I could also, and the other way I could do this, I'm pretty sure, is I can add it here as a color. And actually that's something I probably would do if I'm setting up the file, is to sort of just have my color swatches just saved for easy access. But I'll show you in a second, they'll also be very easily accessible in a moment. But what I can do is just add that, and it adds it as a little swatch there. So, and I think we'll keep this one here because we probably do have a white in this color palette, and that's fine. Now to add a color, it's super easy. It's very simple to the components, but instead of components, I just click color and that's been added there. And I'm gonna do these for all of them, and it's gonna make things super simple for me in the future when I wanna build out things as I go.
Such an important thing. I remember I used to create the decimal values and take screenshots of them and then put them off the artboard in Photoshop or Illustrator just so that I would remember the brand colors. And even then I would get them wrong occasionally. I'm like, why is that red not printing as red? Yeah.
It's so easy to get things a little bit different in colors as well. So like trying to find a way to keep things consistent will make a world of difference. The other thing I'm going to do here is actually define some of these things as well, kind of like you would a style guide. And this is so that if you maybe export these artboards as a little cheat sheet or something, you want to print it off or you want to have something, you can quickly refer to it. I think it's also maybe just for me like a bit of a hang up from my old days in like print and branding.
This is the branding, printing something out and putting it on a wall.
Maybe, or just like consistency. Like I want to have everything defined as well.
Right.
The other thing I want to do here, which actually, here we go. I want to write out what the RGB is of these because depending on what you work in, some developers and what platform, like some prefer hex, often like web, you might use hex values, but I know in iOS, or at least some of the developers I've been working with recently, prefer colors and RGB values. So it's good to kind of define what those are. I'm going to see if I can memorize.
It's a really good point. I guess that handoff portion, that vital handoff portion to actually make something IRL is often overlooked, particularly at the beginning of a process. It's often something that you go, oh great, now I'm working with a developer that wants the RGB.
Yeah, but exactly.
If you just do it from the very beginning, you're all set.
Yeah, I think this is good to have it in mind. And that's a lot of what even just making this as a tool is to future-proof it and to think ahead as to like, you're not the solo person who needs this sort of stuff. Like it's so easy to work on your own kind of files and projects and have it really messy. But the minute you have to hand it over to someone, like you want that to be as easy and simple to use as possible. And you don't want it to make it too hard and to, get people to constantly be asking you questions, and it makes things a bit easy. And it's also like, it shows that you're like quite willing to be collaborative, you're not protective of your files, that sort of stuff. Like it's really quite, I think it's quite good. So I'm not going to go through and do all of these, but as you can see, what I'm doing is just kind of setting these up so that it's easy for someone to quickly look at and, maybe it's taking a screenshot and giving it to a developer. But ordinarily what I would do is go through and kind of label all of these.
Do all of them, yeah. Cool.
I think you could rename these as well if you wanted to rename them as brand colours.
That's funny, yeah. I actually went through that process and I renamed a bunch of colours and I regretted it because I quite like having the quick reference of the hex values.
Yes.
Like if I'm, in another app and I just really need to type it very quickly, or if I'm editing like a website, like if you're using something like a platform or a CMS, even if you're not coding, I don't code, so my websites are like on a different platform. But I'll quickly reference the hex values and update something very quickly. So I quite like having just that sitting in the corner when I'm not working in the style guide, when I'm actually working in like a brand project or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm the same. Festus had a question about the font. It's a good question. This font is called 50 and it's just actually a trial one.
I was going to say that's a retro like 50 font.
Yeah, it's really cool. I really like it. And I've used it as like kind of like a master font in most of it. It's like, I think you can get away with some of the more interesting kind of headline fonts in an app, but you kind of also need to pair that with something that's a bit more kind of functional too. So yeah, but I can't quite remember who did this one. Anyway, it was free to download as a trial and it's really good. The other thing I'm doing for colours, which I'll just do quite quickly, is utility colours, and these are for things like your error states or like kind of success messages. Now, like I don't think I would use any of my brand colours for that necessarily because they're like a little bit too like muted. So I'm just trying to find some colours here that are like a bit nicer that kind of work. I might also, this is my fun little thing, let's see if I've got it here. I also like to check things like the contrast. So I've got this little app up here. I'm not sure if I've been through it before, but
you showed it briefly on one of the sessions, I think. I loved it. Yeah.
So I really like checking this sort of stuff where it's about checking the accessibility of something. So I'll check that against this, which is interesting because it's a fail. Now, that's probably a little bit too light. So what I want to do is kind of go through and make this a little bit darker and maybe a bit more like that color. So I'll go through and just check it again. How is it on this background color? Still fail. That's text though, and I think that's something that you would sort of keep in mind as well. If as a big button, that's probably okay.
So just to explain that up, that basically takes the contrast between, or the tonal values between the two colors, just to make sure that it's like accessibility.
Yes, yeah.
Compliant.
Yes. So you've kind of got like, if I do this red, which should be quite accessible, I'll just color pick that as the front, and then that's the back, and you can see you get this rating here, which is like AA+, you might get AAA if it's super, super accessible. It sort of just means that you're allowing people and making sure that whenever you're designing something, you're not kind of accidentally going down this path where all your colours are really hard for people to read. Yeah. And I see this a lot on like even really mainstream apps. I see so many accessibility problems, and more I think there's a real push to be designing more accessibly now, and it's just like a super important thing to think about.
Yep.
So I've kind of defined these. I'll just put them into my colours as well, so that I've got them for the future. I can put a little thing under them as well, but I don't really need to. So icons. So there's a lot.
Digital P, I hope that's your real name because that's awesome. You're in the right field. Was asking just what that app was called.
Oh, it's just called Contrast.
Contrast.
So it's on the App Store for Mac. They might have sort of like a web one as well, but look into it.
That's super cool.
Yeah. All right, so kind of in a similar way, I'm just going to get these icons from my other document. Now, I have a lot of icons across here, so I probably won't get through putting all of them across. There's a couple that I do want to do, and actually most of them that are probably quite crucial are in this tab bar down the bottom. So I'm going to copy this across, and I'm going to just paste this here. I'm going to just ungroup it so I've got access to these icons. And I'm just going to grab some of these, and I'm just also going to change the color. Now, this is actually quite handy, is I should be able to change the border. Oops, where did it go? To one of my, that changed the fill. But I'll just change it to this blue one here. So I've got that there, and this is just making it easy for me to see. I'll zoom in a bit because I just realized how far out I am and how small these icons are. So I've got this search, which is kind of the far left tab that I've got on there. And that's going to be kind of one of my primary components for this tab bar. So I'm going to add it as a search. I've already named this as a group called search inactive. And the reason why it's called inactive is because it is the inactive state of that particular button. And then the active state is where you've got, probably shouldn't have copied that. Let's see if that works. I might actually just, I wonder if I can break it from the component. Actually, it should be fine. Let's just experiment with this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just actually make the fill this kind of color. It's actually got a bit of a percentage on it, as transparency on it too. So I'm just going to also go in and edit this one here and take out that fill. You can see that took out the fill there. So that's actually, this is a good example of something where like it's probably not working how I want it to work because these are already linked. So I'm just going to backtrack a second and I guess remove that from being a master symbol.
Right. And we could tell that because it had that diamond in the top
left-hand corner. Yes, it had the green diamond in the top of it. So now I've got two here. One of these is going to be, I'm going to make it to a symbol as the inactive search. And this other one, I'm just going to quickly edit so that it's got a fill on it. And this is going to be my active. So that when people tap on that button, they know they're in that tab and it's going to be filled. So I'm just going to rename this to search active. All right. So as you can see, there's a lot to kind of get through. I'm going to do this heart one as well because we'll kind of use that a little bit further down the line. So this sort of stuff does take a bit of time to do, but it's worth kind of getting through and just being a bit patient with it as well. Because I think once you've set it up properly, you're going to feel a lot more like there's a lot more rewarding kind of. And I think you just have a bit of peace of mind that you've set this up properly, that people can follow along and use these things.
I find it's a lot more freeing when you get further into that design and testing phase as well, that you don't feel too precious about anything because you're like, well, actually, that's not going to take me that long to change.
Yeah,
like if you get someone like the client says, well, actually, we don't really want a love heart. Our competitor app uses the love heart. We prefer a thumbs up, for example. You could literally just change out the master in the same style, and then it will work across like all of your apps. So you can be a little bit less precious. I'm like, no, I love the love heart. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, you can still be attached to the love heart because, like, you might get all this way through and you're like,
we're all attached to love hearts.
I really, really liked that icon. I spent ages crafting it. But sometimes you win some, you lose some, and if you, it's not a big deal if you kind of lose the battle on something like that, and you're like, oh, I really have to change it. So that's a bag icon. I've got another bag icon that's active. What I've noticed on these is like the transparency is kind of down a bit on them, but I'm not too worried because I know I can edit. When I actually put these in, I can edit the colors and I can do a lot with it. I'm just putting the masters in to start with. Now, there's more. I'm just going to get rid of this for now. There's a heap more of all of those icons. But
so you basically fill that whole page up with icons.
So in terms of like there's some icons, let's say on this product page, I've got this little plus button here. So that might fit into this product column. I've also got this little tree here to say that's from like reclaimed materials. That would go into that section. In my settings, I might chuck in, got a settings one here, so I'll just put that one in there. And then utility ones as well, like I've got some close buttons as well for the icons. I've got some arrows around as well. So you're basically looking to fill up a lot of those things. And I think it's good to kind of go in that order of putting the icons in first, because what you'll find is your components much later on will involve using those, and kind of like what I showed on that app icon, you want to nest things and keep them all kind of within each other, rather than finding that you've changed an arrow somewhere and it's changed it for the most parts, but you realize you use that arrow in a separate kind of component and you haven't changed that one either. So sort of about thinking ahead, and it's like I quite like this sort of thinking, like it's trying to be quite logical and you're trying to think through all the different future scenarios, but it does also require a little bit of patience, I would say.
Yeah, that's true. I think just we all have a little bit of human error, and we all get busy and everything, and just knowing that everything is correct, and if you change it here, it's going to change across to all.
Yes.
It's just such a, as you said, like a peace of mind.
Yes, definitely. So I'm going to quickly touch on typography as well. In a similar way, I'm just going to copy and paste some stuff across here. I realized when I actually started doing this little concept, it was in 2008, so I haven't updated it to 18, so I need to update that. So I've just copied that headline into here, and I'm going to just put it there. I'm going to change it to that color, which is part of my brand colors. So as you can see, super easy. I might just move this onto one line. So that's the same one as this one here, which is kind of nice. And then I'm going to go to this third section. So in the asset section, you've got on this kind of panel, you've got your colors, you've got components, you've also got character styles. And so again, like everything else, I just click add and it immediately adds it to here, which is super handy because if I now click this one and I want to make it that, I can just quickly change the character style to whatever that is. So again, really handy. And I've also kind of defined a few things. This is again like a bit more kind of a style sheet sort of style where your H1, your H2, it's a bit more web style as well. In an app, it really depends on how you're defining your styles. You might do.
Will you follow like web standards for apps, for digital product design, or can you go a little bit more rogue?
I've worked on ones that are really rogue and some that are fine. I think it really depends. I think for this in particular, I kind of know that, let's say like I've got a wireframe that's a desktop one, so it will actually probably go into a web format. And H1 and H2 are actually quite universal in terms of defining the hierarchy of text. So I know that a H1 is definitely the headline. A H2 might be a subhead, and I know that like a P would be a paragraph or a body text sort of thing. So but I've definitely worked at a large company here in Australia where they just had 1,000 different type styles, and it just was like heading large, body small, heading big, or heading extra large, that sort of stuff. And that's fine. Like if people can follow that and that's all right, it's good. I think when you get too far into your type styles, like something I try and do as a rule with designing across like web or apps or just digitally generally is to limit the amount of type styles I have, because I think once you go above like, I don't know, let's say 4, like I think I'd be looking at having a headline, a subhead, body text, maybe something a little bit different for buttons, and then maybe like a label.
A link or something?
A link text, yep. But you
can cover that with hover states as well, can't
exactly.
you? So.
There's a lot you can do. You can't do that in apps so much, so you do need to think about what the affordance is to make sure people know that that's a link.
Right.
But for the most part, I try and limit it as much as possible, because otherwise it just gets really messy, and then it's very hard to like follow as well. So that's my kind of rule of thumb as much as possible.
I like it. I think we're kindred spirits in that way.
All right, so I've got that type style there. I've also got a little subhead here, which is this one, which I'm just going to get into. If I can just do that. And then I'm going to do the same, just copy it across. I'm going to put it here, see if I can see it. There we go. And I'm just going to add it. And I've got that here. I might also just rename this to be H2. In the same way, I'm keeping like the point size there. In the same way that I've not renamed these ones, it's because it's a good reference, so that if I am kind of trying to communicate to someone what that is or what that type style is, then I can just quickly say like, oh, it's 40 point. Like if they haven't quite got that just yet. And
I think you overwrote.
I did just
overwrote it.
There we go.
Perfect.
And then I've also got this sort of paragraph style here, which I'll just copy in.
And again, I said it before, but if you're coming over from like traditional graphic design, this should seem fairly familiar to you, in that, you know, this is kind of the groundwork of InDesign is to set this sort of stuff up, like in exactly your character styles, so that when you do inevitably need to make changes in the track, down the track, you can do it very, very quickly. So it should feel fairly familiar.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of just where I come from as well in terms of like that's my background. So I think of it a little bit in that sense as well, but I also try and think about it digitally in terms of like, you know, what developers need and have a bit of that lens as well. But especially for handing over to other designers to work on, like I do want to think about what's easy for them to pick up and use. So that's probably enough in terms of type styles at the moment. There's a few others in there, like I said, like a label style and like a button style. The button style I've got is actually just the same as this. You might make it a little bit bolder depending on the button. So yeah, you're kind of going to just tweak things. And what I've definitely found going through a lot of this stuff is that I have tweaked a few things, and you'll copy something across and you'll realize it's a little bit different between different things. So this is like a good chance to kind of just settle on like, what's that one kind of design that we've got for this button? Cool, that's it. I've tweaked it, I've refined it in this state, and I'm going to just almost like just commit it into the library and by saying like, this is kind of my primary button.
Right.
So this is my secondary kind of button, and this is like a different add button that I've got for on the pages. So these are all actually quite white, which as you saw in here, they stand out a lot, and that's why they're a primary button. Now, if I was to put one of these on here, and I change those fills to be white, it's not quite the same in terms of legibility. So that's why I would just find this is like a secondary one. So yeah, so as you can see, like if that was down to the right size, that's my secondary style of button. So yeah, so I've kind of just added these in quickly. I can add these secondary kind of, I need to go rename one of those other ones. So this is also a primary, but like an oval style one. I am doing this very fast, so.
Yeah. We have a question. Is the template for the lookbook available inside XD? No, not for this particular project. This is like an example that Liv is working on that she's showing us. But if you want to play around with these, there are, I think, iOS and the Google material. Is that native in here? I can't remember if it is.
Yeah,
There's a couple of UI patterns that you can play around with.
Yeah, we tried to demo this earlier, but because we didn't have an internet. But I'll just show you. If I go to add-ons and I go to UIKits here, it just opens up this link in adobe.com and I've got all of these here, and I can just go to get the kit. Now this takes me to the Apple developer page where they've got all their resources for all these different things. With Apple, I will say you'll need to download San Francisco, the font, which is their font, but I can download this XD kind of files for iOS.
Yep.
So that's super easy, and then you can start to use them within the designs as well.
Yep. So if you want to have a play around, I recommend that. They're huge. They're quite big, but they're also really useful as a term of reference.
Yeah.
I've found as well. So I've often used them and then brought them in and gotten rid of everything I didn't need, and then recreated kind of buttons that were a similar sort of size and shape. Because I know that these work well. So if you don't really know where to start, you can always take one of those templates and then convert it and make it your own with your own colors and fonts, and you'll know that you're starting from a good foundation.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. I just saw Alex's question there about the click and hover states. I think if you were doing a style guide, absolutely. This is a good place for you to define what those are. I think at the moment, just because I've got this in an app at the moment, I haven't thought about that because you don't really have those states. But yeah, I would definitely look at within the buttons. I would have probably another column here for states, and
so like a third row.
Almost, yeah. And
so it's like active, inactive, and hover.
Yep.
Cool.
Yep. So yeah, so like I said, I'm going through this quite quickly. So I think I've got a few other different buttons and stuff in there. So then what I would do is I just copy and paste them on. As I've just done, add them to my components section here. So we're ready to go. And then, not to be confusing, I've got another section on components. And this is where these are kind of bigger elements within the app that I do want to keep a bit consistent across different flows. And that's usually useful if you're like, let's say you want to test a particular flow and you need to quickly mock up a design. It's like, I know that this particular element, if I make it a component, sort of my product item, I know that if I put that on the app somewhere, maybe I want to change it from being a grid to being something a bit more different, but like they're still as a component, they're still quite consistent. And then this is like sort of what that product item, not called bitmap, but like just some main image. You might think about like naming conventions on stuff like this are going to be quite useful as well. So I would think about how you can name things so that when people go to use them, they're not like, do I use logo 1 or logo 2 or logo 3? Like,
right.
you know, like give it a bit of a sense of it's how you might use stuff. This is like, for example, a size picker. Now, within this, I've got little elements, but I can just make this one whole component. So selector. And I can just now drag that onto a board or a new artboard when I'm doing some prototyping or designing it itself. And this is a tab bar up here. Now, what I probably would do is actually recreate these. So I'm actually dragging in all of these icons I've just made so that I know I've got them linked within that tab bar. I would use that tab bar across the rest of the app and kind of just modify it depending on when I need it.
Yeah, cool.
So I've covered a lot of different things. We've sort of only got 5 minutes left. But what I wanted to quickly show you was how you can actually start to use this. So I've just got it saved up here into the cloud. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up this file which I've got, which is kind of like a wireframes that I've got. So I might have actually already done these before even getting into the library. But I wanted to just sort of define what this looks like without having to get into the styles too much. So I've just got like a home page. I've got product page itself, and I can start to add in some of those components that I've actually already created. And this is when it's like quite handy because I now know from app to like desktop, there's consistency.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the way I'm going to do this, I'm going to click this link assets button. And in my cloud documents, and this is also useful if someone's shared one with you, you can click onto that. But because this is from my cloud account, I can just do this. And there are all my assets. So super handy and super useful.
So that's, I think 57 minutes in, Alex, we just answered your question. So it was
really to the right at the end.
Yeah, but this really is it.
hanging.
And obviously this is even like a very fast, very, very, very fast kind of look at what you would do. So like this is where like it's super, super useful. So Liv could share that with me as well. Obviously I could be anywhere in the world. And you could share that with me, and then I would have all of the hex, values, all of the fonts right there, all of every component that's ever been made. And Liv knows that, as long as she trusts me not to change any of that stuff, that I will be adhering to the digital, essentially, style guide and brand guidelines. So I can start building, and of course you can collaborate in XD as well. But that's a whole nother live stream.
Another one, yeah. So as you can see, I can start to bring things in. I've got this like just as a style, but I know this is a H1, so I can start to change what this looks like. I can change my button here. Just get rid of this one here. And I will drag in, let's say I'm going to use this button. It's my oval button. And I'm just going to change this text to shop now. And I will just expand that out. Center it, and I'm going to make it the same color as my background here. I've got this section, this little box up here is kind of representative of the logo. So I'm going to grab my logo, which is the first one that I did down here. What logo? I wonder where my first logo went. Seems to be missing. All right, we're using logo 3. And I can just change this to white, which is kind of handy because I think like I can now change it to whatever color suits that section. And there we go. It's a bit sluggish today. Maybe it's my computer. Maybe it's the cold. Super cold in Sydney at the moment.
It is very cold in Sydney.
And then I've got like these, boxes to represent images. Just going to get rid of these. And actually what I've done already, if I remember how to do this, is I've got a little library of all my images that I might want to chuck in here. So like I said, I've gone and got these off Unsplash, but you might use Adobe Stock. And that's now linked in there, which is really handy. So again, if I change stuff in there, I can do that. Just gonna grab, wow, it's really not happy with.
Your computer knows that there's only a minute left.
Yeah. It's like, wrap it up.
Yeah.
Anyway, what I was gonna do and what I might just quickly do here is do a little mask over the top of this. I'd probably be working to a grid for this, just if anyone's wondering. I'm not just placing them kind of really near.
This is the quick version.
Yep. So yeah, so
Mask with shape is kind of Adobe XD's version of a clipping mask.
Yep.
For everyone playing at home.
So yeah, so I can start to like pretty easily just fill this out with all the components that I've just started making and make sure that like things like the type styles, the colors, the buttons, they all kind of fit quite nicely with everything that I've got there. And you know, when I'm here on a product page where things are like getting quite detailed, you know, I might just change that fill to let's make it this purple. And you know, I know I've got a favorite button or an icon which I've already defined, so I'm just gonna get rid of this. I'm gonna drag over my little favorite icon, and that's gonna sit there. And it's actually usually I've got a different kind of component to go with it, but I can now kind of just play with this and edit it. And yeah, like it's very simple to start to like roll it out, and hopefully even though this is like the basics sort of stuff, like you can start to see why it would be really easy if your computer's working fast and at a normal speed to change stuff like this and start to just roll it out super fast, which just makes your life a lot easier. And again, like I said, it's about consistency. It's about making sure that people are on the same page, and you can really scale what you're doing to fit.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, it's been so great. So it's freezing in Brisbane and it's 10 degrees in Wellington. So oof,
Oh wow.
maybe we shouldn't complain too much.
I probably shouldn't.
Thank you so much. Thank you guys for all the questions. This replay will be available on YouTube as well. There was a couple of links. I'm not sure if we shared in the chat, but we will at the end if we didn't. Oh no, I can see that's in the chat. So there's lots of resources out there for Adobe XD. And so, yeah, check them out. There's also a Discord group. If we haven't shared that, we will after this show as well, where you can join in. There's about 7,000 people that are just learning XD from scratch. And there's a whole community in there with people from Adobe and evangelists and everything involved that are actually giving feedback on people's work and everything. It's a really great resource to check out. I'm in there. It's just, there's so much going on, but it's a great way to learn from scratch. So yeah, there's the link there. So check that out. Thank you so much, Liv.
No worries.
Thank you for coming back on, and stay tuned because in about 5 minutes we're going to do a creative challenge also with Liv. See you soon.